Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Traveling Therapist Podcast. I'm really excited today to have our guest. I've actually known her for a while. We went to a very intimate retreat in Costa Rica together. God, how many years ago was that, Michelle, that we did
Two
that?
years ago.
Was it 2? 2 years or
Yes,
3
it
years?
was. It was 2 years ago.
Oh, 2 years. I'm so bad with time.
I know.
So we can maybe touch on that a little bit, but I'm glad to have you here as a guest. And before we even start, I just want to say, I know you guys listening often hear me talk about all the income streams that I have and all of that. And I like to be upfront and honest that sometimes it's like a total shit show trying to run these things. And for example, this podcast, people ask me all the time, like, how hard is it to run a podcast? And I'm like, it's not that bad if you have a good podcast editor. But the other side of it is like guest management, like trying to have a guest that shows up. So we're actually recording this on Thanksgiving Day. Thank God Michelle signed up for this day. I don't think I even realized it was Thanksgiving when I opened it up on my calendar. But she's here with me on Thanksgiving Day. And I was just telling her before I hit record that I think I've had 6 people scheduled over the last 2 weeks and they have all canceled at the last minute. Like literally just sitting here. I'm sitting here waiting in the studio and I get an email that people have canceled. I'm like, are you kidding me? So, it's just putting that out there to say that's the hardest part of it because really it's who cares? You just skip a week or whatever. But I also have a sponsor for this podcast. So I like to talk about that a little bit too. Alma sponsors this podcast. They have for years now. They're amazing. I love Alma, but they expect an episode every week, right? So it's it becomes a little bit of pressure. They sponsor. It's great. I love to talk about Alma, but then it's oh my God, I don't have an episode to put out and they're paying me to put episodes out too, to represent their company so they can sponsor an actual podcast episode. So
do you think it's certain times of the year? Or does it seem to be all the time?
Yeah, it's really random. And I'll kind of wake up that day and have 3 scheduled. I'm how many are going to actually show? It's wild to me because I'm kind of a perfectionist. So I never I don't miss a point. I try not to miss appointments ever, So when people do that, I'm oh my God. And then it's 3 in a row in a day. It just blows my mind. But anyway, I wanted to just put that out there for anybody thinking about starting a podcast. I like to be honest about the pros and cons of running multiple income streams. And this is one of them with the podcast. Anyway, just want to get that out of the way. And then welcome, Michelle. I'm so glad you're here. She's got lots of cool things to talk about. She travels a lot, and we're going to just touch on that and what she's doing in her practice and how she manages a hyper practice while she's traveling and all of that. So Michelle Kauble, welcome to the show. I always start out and just say, how did you go from being a traditional therapist to a traveling therapist?
That's a good question. So I will give you the word for what kind of changed my whole perspective on what I wanted my counseling life to look like. And that word was divorce.
Nice. I love it.
I did not travel extensively before I got divorced in 2016. I was still a resident in counseling during that time, or what we called in Alabama an associate licensed counselor. I was living in Alabama and I had been married for 8 years. And I was in grad school. I was married. I was running a mentoring program. I was doing so much. I never hardly traveled, but I kept on trying to. But I also had a very unsupportive partner who wasn't all about the traveling life. So altogether, I just didn't travel much. And I was just constantly working. And then once I got divorced, I started to realize on a personal level, there's a whole world out there and I'm getting older and I'm not doing anything. Why am I not traveling when I love it so much? And that first kind of trip to Puerto Rico, I went there in 2016, I think. And I found myself in this place where I was really worried that I was oh my gosh, I'm going to be sad while I'm there. I'm going to be oh, but I wish, I wasn't alone. I didn't feel that way at all.
That wasn't the case.
Nope.
You were this is awesome.
This is awesome. And so I don't know if you know, but I am a solo tripping gal.
I know. I do know that about you. I remember when we were in Costa Rica, you were leaving the retreat after that and you had plans to go. And I think you even had a boyfriend at the time and you were who cares? And you were I'm hitting all these places in Costa Rica by myself.
Oh yeah. I needed that whole next week to be by myself and go where I wanted to go and wanted to see. Oh yeah, I'm a solo
I think that's
traveler.
awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's so brave. I talk about that on here when we have solo travelers. I'm like, I don't know if I could actually do it. Like, just go by myself all over the world like that. And you've been a lot of places
Oh,
like that.
I recommend actually doing it on purpose, actually,
I love that.
because there's something about, and this kind of ties into things that I talk to about with some of my younger counselors, my beginning counselors.
Mhm.
There's something about when you are by yourself, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. I'm kind of an ambivert. I've kind of like finally come to a place where I'm like, I'm an ambivert, where you really are outside of your comfort zone because you don't have like this other person you're talking to all the time.
Yeah,
And you're not, like when I'm with my bestie Erica, we're going to be hanging out this weekend. We're going to go to Charlotte and we're going to explore. All my time I'm
fun.
going to spend with her, talking to her, experiencing it with her. When I go on my trips, I am experiencing it within, and I'm experiencing it also with whoever is around me at the time.
Mhm.
On my
Right.
solo trips, I talk to people. Like I have to talk to people. I'm around people all the time. I go on Airbnb experiences a lot. That always helps
Oh, I
me
love
meet
that.
people. That is a
Yeah.
solo tripping gals. Like tip number one, do Airbnb experiences.
That is awesome. I see those all the time, and I'm always
Yep,
like, "Hey, Ken, you wanna go, like,
I'll do them.
kayaking in the bioluminescent, canals in Florida?" You know?
That one, do it. Yes.
Have you done that? Oh.
I've done that, but I did that in,
Oh.
Cuba,
Oh,
actually.
that's awesome. Oh my
So,
gosh.
that was really
Wow.
cool, yeah.
That's so cool.
When you go on a solo trip, like, you're literally, like, constantly experiencing things, like, within yourself,
Mhm.
and you go always at your own pace too. Like, if I wanna, sit for a while after I'm done eating and just read a book, I can. If I wanna do a little bit of work, I can. If I wanna just sleep in, I'm just like, "Forget my plans this morning." I don't have to worry about anybody else being like, "Oh, come on, let's go," or I'm not trying to drag somebody else behind me, and
Yeah,
it's
or worrying, like, for me,
right.
I, like, always worry. I'm like, "Do they wanna do this? Do they wanna do that?" I'm always, like,
All the
trying to, like, micromanage everybody's happiness. I'm, like,
Exactly.
so codependent that way.
No, no, but it's like, it's
Yeah.
so much fun enjoying these things with someone else and seeing their
Mhm.
perspective. But
Yeah.
that's where, like, if you don't ever do solo things, you lose your own perspective and your own
Mhm.
growth, and that, like, being
I
able
love
to be
that.
comfortable just with yourself.
I
But
love that.
I always end up making friends. I always end up talking to people, usually through those Airbnb experiences. We'll end up
Yeah.
hanging out afterwards. They'll give me recommendations on different things that they've done. And I mean,
Cool.
I've made friends with people from all over the world, especially in Costa Rica. God, so
Oh, yeah.
cool. From Europe and Africa and everywhere. And so the more I talk to them, I'm gaining these different experiences and learning from people as I go. And it only just makes my understanding of people I work with in counseling richer.
I love that. I love that.
Mhm.
And you touched on real briefly, you mentioned your younger interns. Could you talk about that for a second? Like, you have a group practice.
I
Maybe you could just
do.
share a little bit about, like, your group practice and the
Mhm.
type of therapist that you bring on and, like, you're sort of mentoring these younger therapists. I'd love to just touch on that if somebody hasn't thought of that. I mean, I think you're such a cool role model because you're doing this hybrid traveling thing and you're
Mhm.
bringing on interns, and I mean, I feel like you're encouraging that, like, lifestyle with the people that you're employing, which I think is so cool.
Well, it's really funny because I didn't start my practice on purpose.
Yeah. Oh,
That was
I
on
think
the
I remember
radar
the story.
even like a month before I started it. It was not in the plans. It wasn't on the radar.
Yeah.
My bosses at the time basically backed me into a corner
Mhm.
and took what was supposed to be a clinical position and turned it into a argue with insurance companies all day and be a paper.
Oh.
And I was like, I am a therapist. This is who I am. And
Mhm.
so basically, I just had to all of a sudden start my practice because I already had clients and
Yes.
I wasn't going to let him go. So I just literally just September of 2018, I just did it. It's been a wild ride ever since. But I was just kind of by myself and I had just a few clients while I was working my regular job for like a good year, year and a half ish. And then I brought on another licensed counselor just like me. And it was just me and her. Her name is Kayla. She's amazing. It was just me and her. And we were just chilling and doing our thing. I wasn't really thinking about interns and I wasn't thinking about residents in
Mhm.
counseling, supervisees. But then when it did come time to when I realized that there was such a need in my area, especially for what you might call a pediatric therapist or a therapist that works with children. And
Mm.
that's my big passion. I love working with children. Please don't give me the adults. Like, love you guys, but
Yeah.
that's a whole separate thing. But
Yeah.
anyways, it wasn't really on my radar then either, but there was such a need, and it seemed like there was a lot of supervisees that needed a job. It's like,
Mhm.
gosh, these jobs want me to have experience, but who's going to give me the experience? And I had
Yeah.
such a rocky road when I went through my supervision time. And I don't know if anybody can like kind of relate with me on this, but when in 2014, I graduated in July, and then I started working at a private practice in a psychologist office. And boy, I learned so much while I was there. It was a wonderful experience the whole way through, very
Yeah.
difficult, long hours. I mean, just your typical experience, except I had a supervisor that didn't want to meet with me.
Mm.
He
Oh,
said,
no.
"Oh, when you have a question, you just come let me know." And I was like, "Well, wait a second. That's not what this is supposed to be." And I was a little bit of a rule follower. I was like, "Hold on."
Yeah.
So
Right.
basically, we met, and he made it the most unbearable experience to be in a room with him
Oh.
for an hour. And so basically, we met over the course of several years, very few times. I went to him for some questions, things like that. But basically, my whole supervision experience was extremely unsatisfactory. I learned
Aw.
so much from my fellow counselors, though. Like, I leaned on them hard because of
Nice.
the fact that I wasn't meeting regularly with a seasoned professional. So
Mhm.
I mean, when I tell you I was in their offices all the time, picking their brains, researching online, doing CEUs for play therapy. I mean, I just had to really just delve in to learn. And so when I thought about taking on these residents, I was like, this would be really cool to just give them a totally different experience than the one that I had, like somebody who's actually supportive, who shout out to Beth Watley, my internship supervisor,
Awesome.
thebomb.com. She was open door, talk to me about anything, nothing's off limits. I wanted to be like that. And I wanted to give these
Yeah.
experience. Ever since then, I've taken on so many residents that have all now become licensed professional counselors.
Amazing.
Advisees and social work come through and have outside supervision, but have come through Apple Tree and become LCSWs. And
Mhm.
then I just had people from different schools reach out and be like, "Hey, I need an internship site."
Oh my
And now I've
gosh.
developed a whole internship program, and my interns have been just stellar.
That's
It's been
amazing.
some of the best, my favorite work that I've really done has been some of the work that I've done
Love
with
that.
my interns.
I love
Truthfully,
that. Yes. And so what state are you in? I can't remember. Is it New
Virginia,
Jersey? Oh, Virginia. It
Virginia.
is?
Mhm.
Why did I think you were in Pennsylvania or New Jersey? I'm sitting in Virginia
I
right
feel
now
like
too.
half of the people on our trip were like from like all Pennsylvania, New Jersey, though. Like
Yeah.
Andrea, Tina,
Yeah. I don't know why I
they're
was thinking
all
that.
from like Pennsylvania, New Jersey area ish. So
Okay, that's cool. So your practice, is it hybrid, like your interns come in and out, or is it all like remote? Like they all do like telehealth?
so there's like 14 of us, and
Whoa.
yeah, and I have some clinicians that are all virtual.
Yeah.
Very few now, though. And then I have
Okay.
some that do mostly virtual and some in person. And then I have
Mhm.
some that do mostly in person and do a little bit of virtual. And then
Okay.
maybe I'd say well, I have quite a bit of virtual too. So we're all a little bit of a hybrid. And even
That's
some of my
cool.
interns, they also see some virtuals and some in person. So we have two offices, and we also go back and forth between those two offices, and we do
Wow.
some in person. As a practice owner, I don't try to control everybody's schedule. I don't have like a time off sheet. Like, if you want to be off, you can be off. Like, I don't feel like I need to manage something I don't need to manage.
Yeah.
So like some of us, like if they're going to be off, as I am like, hey, make sure you got links to everybody for virtual, and things like that. You're
That's
going to go
cool.
travel, go do your thing, because it's
That's cool.
good.
That's what I was going to ask you. If they're like, "Hey, Michelle, by the way, I want to go to Spain for like 3 months. Is
Mhm.
that cool?" Are you like,
Oh,
"Yeah, whatever," or
it would depend on like their caseload. It would depend on
okay?
like population that they're seeing a lot of, because
Mm,
we're all a mix of that too. So we're very, very collaborative. Like, I have
that's
clinicians that
amazing.
are like, do not give me a child.
Yeah.
No. Like you, like, don't do that.
Yeah.
And then I have other people that are like me that are like, oh yeah, please, mostly kids, mostly teens, couple, young college age. I love that. I love
Mhm.
that age too.
Yeah.
And so I have a mix of everybody. Now, if they're my supervisee, they're seeing
Mhm.
children and teenagers because that is my area of expertise.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
we are all a mix. And so when we have like an issue with like an adult client or something that we're like, God, I can't figure out this, I can't get to the bottom of it. It's fine. I have somebody else that works with that. I have
Mhm.
somebody that has training in OCD. I have somebody that has training in mentalization, trauma, TFCBT. Just,
Wow.
we all kind of have our strengths. And so we all collaborate.
That's very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So you would it would depend on like the population and the caseload if you
Mhm.
felt comfortable telling them to just go somewhere for 3 months. If it's like maybe kids or high acuity, you'd probably want them more in the office if they're seeing that type of population,
Well,
I'm
that's the
guessing.
interesting part because when COVID hit, I
Yeah,
was
right.
seeing mostly young children.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
bless Dr. Rachel Altevater, there is a lot of play therapists that are like, yeah, digital play therapy. Let's do this thing.
That's cool. Mhm. No, not so much.
I am, I, Me and technology have a fraught relationship.
Okay.
So, so I tried. I was trying to learn how to do like this like virtual playroom and it
Yeah.
did not go.
Oh,
So you
wow.
really got to have a really good handle on it. But there's a lot of people
Mhm.
that have a really good handle on it and made it work. I couldn't make it work. I
Yeah.
want my toys, I want my materials, I want to be able to move around in the playroom and that because of COVID couldn't happen. So I did have to shift and I had to
Mhm.
take on more adults. I took on more teenagers because then I started traveling too. So during
Yeah.
the pandemic, I did move around carefully,
Mhm.
but I took some consulting work and I did some consulting work around Charlottesville and Gordonsville and like different areas in Virginia. I
Gotcha.
did go out of the country, and I went to Costa Rica. So,
Mhm.
I did some traveling, careful traveling, but I had to really adjust for my clients because too, sometimes clients don't want to do virtual. Sometimes they're like, I got
Yes.
kids running in and out of the room. I can't concentrate. My husband's over there
Mhm.
playing video games loud. You always have to take your clients too into consideration and try to figure out how to kind of help them and then work around that as well. So, but I've
I
been
love
very
that.
lucky. My clients have been very understanding when I had to go virtual. I'm able to go virtual.
That's very cool. So before we hit record, you were telling me that you just took a trip to I don't know, what was April, right? When you went to the Azores, I think you were
Mhm.
talking about. Now, did you see your clients? Did you just tell them, "Hey, I'm still going to see you," or were you just like, "Hey, I'm taking a week off"? Like, or how did you manage that whole thing?
So for that one, for most of the kids that I work with, I let parents know that I'm going to be out of town,
Okay,
and I always tell them that I'm going on vacation. And
nice.
the cool part about that is that I always end up bringing things back from my travels, and I have them in the office.
Oh, I
And
love
kids are
that.
so curious, and they're very like, "What did you do? Where did you go?" And like I'm not always very open with self
Sure.
disclosure. I'm a little more conservative side of self disclosure, but I find that, seeing that their therapist is kind of like somebody who goes out and experiences things and travels, I feel like it opens a door to like exploring like who we are and where we go and how we
Mm,
relate with people and the things that we bring back, there's a whole thing with that. So like I tell them I'm going and I'm traveling and I'm doing this.
mhm.
So it's really cool when I come back and then we get to talk about it a little bit and I can bring it into the therapy process in like a very positive, holistic way. But for the rest of my clients, like especially a lot of my teenagers, they're totally cool with doing virtual. The adults totally fine doing virtual. So I did see a lot of my clients there. And it
Nice.
was really cool because I tend, this is something funny. You tell me if you ever do this to yourself.
Okay. I'm
I'm
sure I
terrible.
do.
I have a tendency that even if I'm only staying somewhere for a week, I
Yeah.
always want to be in different parts of like the area. So like I'll
Mm.
I'll I'll travel around an area for like I'll be like in one Airbnb for like 2 days, and then I'll be in a different Airbnb for like 3 or 4 or 5 days, and then a different one after that. And I always curse myself. I'm always just like, I am so tired of packing this suitcase. Why did I do
I
this?
feel ya.
You do? Because like it's so
Well,
annoying.
because
I have to
we
pack again.
yeah, I mean, we move, like, every week or, like, for example, this next week, we're gonna move, like, 3 times trying to get to a different place, so it's like we are constantly packing the suitcase and unpacking the suitcase. It is like, oh my god. In Ken's car, like, we have bins with, like, this is the kitchen stuff, this is the clothes, this is, like, the coffee maker because we like to have our coffee maker. I know it's weird, but we do. So we've got all these different but yeah, it's a real pain in the butt at times. Like, I was just telling him
Yes.
last night. I'm like, I am tired. Like, I
Yeah.
want to just stay somewhere for like a month for a
Yeah.
while, you know?
And I always say that to myself once I get
Hmm.
there and I don't
Yeah,
have this like, ooh, but I want to check this out. Oh, I want to check this out while I'm
exactly.
here. And then when I'm there, I'm like, why have I done this to myself?
Yes.
But like clients that I would see like on a weekly or biweekly basis,
Yeah.
sometimes I would be in a different place in a different space. And that, I had one Airbnb where I had literally like the ocean behind me from a
Hmm.
distance. And the clients
Hmm.
were like, wow, that's really cool. Like that's really neat. Like where are you at and stuff like that. And my clients have gotten used to that. And,
Hmm.
one thing that again, I want to encourage younger therapists as much as financially as it is possible because the money
Hmm.
issue when you're under supervision and you're trying to still pay bills and possibly paying for supervision, which I provided for free for mine. I really do encourage the therapists that I work with to look at like what they can do while they're still beginning in their journey of becoming a therapist because traveling opens you up as a person and also helps you to understand other people from so many diverse backgrounds and like even just
Hmm.
like traveling around the state that you live in like that was really
Yeah.
cool for me when I went to Gordonsville and I was doing my consulting work down there and got to know people down there. That was really cool. But I encourage them to do that because whenever I'm traveling and I get to experience different people and different cultures and things like that, it always ends up adding something to what I understand about the culture of my clients or myself. And then it opens me up as a person. And there's a lot
Hmm.
to be said about also even like how we talk with our clients and how they kind of relate with us. This new generation that we're in, these new generations, like
Yeah.
after ours, here's the thing. Even when I was taught, it was like self-disclosure is bad. Self-disclosure is bad. Don't talk
Yeah.
about
Right.
yourself.
Right. Right.
If they say something
Right.
about something that's around, you just change the subject and you go back to them. But,
Nice.
being able to share, like when they see the background, they're like, oh, that is so cool. And being
Hmm.
able to say where I'm at and being able
Yeah.
to say how cool of an experience it is. Many times, again, these open up the doors for discussion about where our clients are at and how they're taking time for themselves and how they're
Hmm.
exploring themselves on purpose and what they like and what they enjoy. So,
I love
that's the
that.
joys of being a traveling therapist is all these new experiences that we're having. They're constantly teaching us something new about ourselves and testing our boundaries, testing our ability to communicate with people we don't know, to open
Mhm.
up to people that we don't know.
I love it. I totally agree with you about the self-disclosure. My clients will say, where in the world are you today, Kim?" You
Yeah.
know? And I'm like, "Well, I'm sitting in blah blah blah." And they love it. They love the
Yeah.
sense of adventure. They think it's really cool. And like you
Mhm.
said, it inspires them to
Yeah.
want to think bigger or different than what they're doing right now in their lives.
If
I
I
think it's
had
cool.
like $1 for every time a client said, "So wait a minute, you're vacationing by yourself? You're taking a trip by yourself? I could
Yeah.
never."
Yeah. That's
And see, that's the
awesome.
thing is like then it opens up. What do you think is scary about that?
It's like, why couldn't you? Tell me more
Yeah,
about
let's
that.
just talk more about that. Exactly.
I
So that's
love
a really
that.
cool thing. Yeah.
That's so awesome. That's so cool. So, I'm trying to think of some other things that I know about you. You're fluent, right, in Spanish? Am I
Oh,
remembering
yeah.
that correctly? You're like
Mhm.
totally fluent in Spanish. So, I wonder if that contributes to like feeling comfortable because I know you go to a lot of Spanish speaking places.
I
Do you think that makes it
do.
easier, or do you think it even matters for
Oh,
like a
man.
solo traveler?
I get very especially now versus,
Yeah.
like, maybe when I first started traveling, I
Hmm.
get very excited to use my Spanish. So, like, I'll go, like, way out of my way to, like, find a way to use it, especially because I don't use it that much anymore, and I'm
Yeah.
like,
Right.
"Ah," I used to
Hmm.
be, like, speaking it every day, it was a constant thing, and so my
Yeah.
Spanish was so good, and now it's like, "Oh, it's so rusty." So
It's rusty.
I'm very annoying about going out of my way to talk to people in Spanish. But yeah,
That's
that
great.
I do tend to go to Spanish speaking countries because I
Hmm.
can have real conversations with real people.
Yeah.
And when I'm doing that, it'll open up my eyes to things, that you're not going to learn just by reading an article. Like before I went to Cuba, I read tons of articles and like
Yeah.
I was watched a little documentary on the history of Cuba and it was fascinating. I was staying a lot of Airbnbs because
Hmm.
that's part of the reason you're allowed to go to Cuba is to support the Cuban people.
Hmm.
And so I was having a lot of conversations with them, and really practicing my Spanish, but like more listening to them and their perspective. And I went in 2019 And
Mhm.
it was when Cuba was really just kind of starting to get the internet. Like they were
Yeah,
very
right.
disconnected from the outside world. So
Yeah.
I was
Mhm.
having a conversation with one gentleman, talking about, raising kids and about life in Cuba and things like that, and then asking him his perception of
Yeah.
what life is like in the States. And it was
Yeah.
so different. And he said, I don't want to live in the States. I'd be worried that people would just come and shoot my child in the streets. And I was
Wow.
like, oh my God. And, I think I take it for granted because I'm an American and I know
Right.
how things are, but people's perceptions, especially with such limited outside view,
Yeah.
like they're kind of being told extremes. I mean, things that do happen, but like extremes. And
Yeah.
so like it was so fascinating and thinking about, the people of where I'm going and the people who are coming to see me, like
Mhm.
who they're being raised by and who they're around and how different it is to understand even what a law means to so many people. What does police mean to so many people? And it's incredibly fulfilling to have these conversations with people and have my mind open in ways that otherwise would not. So I do tend to go to a lot of Spanish speaking countries, but the Azores, boy, oh boy,
What is that? That's Portuguese, right?
Portuguese.
Yeah, okay, I was gonna say, I think it's Portuguese. Wow.
Not a fan of the
No?
language, guys. I'm
Were you
sorry,
like, "This
Frankie.
is not even in my realm of understanding."
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. It is, bless all of you who have ever spoken Portuguese once in life. It is hard. So
That's
that really pushed
amazing.
me out of my comfort zone because
Yeah.
I kept wanting to talk to people in Spanish and I'm like, no, I
It's not
can't.
Spanish.
Not Spanish. So
Yeah.
then it was a real challenge for me, honestly. Like I
That's
kind of
interesting.
had like a
Mhm.
day of like struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, I am, like, really aware of, like, I feel like any country I go to, I'm, like, expecting everybody to just know English, like, I really rely on that. I'm like, I feel like most people can speak some English, but that's not always the case, so I think that makes me a little nervous too, like, going to countries by myself in a country that doesn't natively speak English, and that's why I was just wondering because I remember you speak Spanish fluently. I feel like that would make it a little less scary for some
Mhm.
people, but yeah, I just think that's so interesting. And really every country I've ever been to,
Mhm.
I've not had a hard time communicating either with Google
No.
Translate or, just most people do, I mean, speak English. I mean, they've
But
learned
but you wanna know
English.
something really funny? Is
Yeah.
that I go up to people in Costa Rica, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Panama, any place that I've been that speaks Spanish. I go up to people and I start speaking to them in Spanish, and there's so many times when they just automatically start speaking to me in English, and I'm kinda like,
Oh,
"Hey,
yeah.
you do know I speak your language," but they don't they wanna practice their English. So
Oh, interesting.
I
Yeah.
encourage you, and I encourage anybody listening, go to a country where you don't speak the language because you will find
Yes.
people who do speak English and they just like how I'm always like trying to find like an opportunity to use it so I don't lose it. They
Yeah.
are doing the same thing and they want to speak in English. They need that practice. They need to hear your pronunciation. They gain a lot from that. So
That's amazing.
it's happened so many times where I'm trying to speak to them in Spanish and they just immediately start speaking to me in English. And I have to
Yeah.
like understand that. They're like, I'm so glad I get to practice. Oh, it's so nice to be able to speak to somebody in English. I'm like,
That's cool. That's
okay.
really cool to know because I wonder about that. I'm like, are they annoyed that they even have to speak
There's
English to
probably
me?
people are annoyed
Probably a
everywhere, but
mix.
for very
Yeah.
different reasons.
Right, right, right.
Well, too is like people a lot of times will ask me things about, what it's like in the States and stuff like that, and about different states and like,
Mhm.
everywhere has skyscrapers and like all kinds of cool stuff. So it's really cool to talk about those things too.
I love it. Yeah, I'm partners with another company too, Berries, and the two co-owners, they're in, you kind of looked at me, they're like an AI note writing company. They're in Israel and
Mhm.
they are amazing. And every week we have like a partnership call, like, what are we going to promote? How are we going to tell everybody about this amazing product? I love Berries so much. But they're always like catching me up like on what's going on in
Yeah.
Israel and they love to talk to me. You're right about the language because they love to say, well, how do you say this, Kim? And how do you
Uh-huh.
say this? And I'm like this. And they're like, okay. And then they'll teach me a little bit of their language and we kind of go back and forth. So
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah,
The
I really
cultural
like
exchange, it's so
yeah.
enriching. It's
Hmm.
so enriching. And when
Yeah.
I'm on my solo trips, because I'm not like, entertaining this person I'm with, or because they're them standing there while I'm speaking another language to somebody or while talking to somebody, it might be boring to them. But when I'm on my solo trips and I'm having a conversation with somebody, whether it's like my tattoo artist that I'm talking to or somebody at a restaurant, like I can take time to like sit there and go like, oh, well, this is how you say it, and stuff like that. And then I can
Yeah.
kind of go, hey, I noticed somebody said this to me. What does this exactly mean? And it's so
Mm,
cool that I can, that's again like another benefit of solo tripping is like I can take time to have these conversations when they come up,
that's so
and I don't
cool.
feel like I have to hurry up or cut things off because
Yeah,
I
worried about your
am
person
waiting.
you're traveling with, like
Yeah.
they're bored or they don't want to talk or whatever. Yeah, no, I totally get it.
Yep.
I need to take a solo trip somewhere.
Do it on purpose though, truly. Like and
I
start out
know.
somewhere that's kind of like
Yeah.
my recommendation is to start out somewhere that's kind of easier
Mhm.
to finesse. Like
Yeah.
Puerto Rico is a good example because like you
Mhm.
drive on the same side of the road. A lot of people speak English there, so you can kind of get by like if you get lost or something like that. And it's
Yeah.
just, very it's got its parts that are very Americanized. So it's like a little bit easier to manage travel by yourself if you're somewhere like that. If I had
Love
gone
that.
like to the Azores on like my first solo trip, I probably would have been
Freaking out.
freaking out and coming home early.
Right.
So yeah.
I love that. So if you're gonna do it, think it through a little bit.
Yeah,
Don't do
exactly.
it. Don't make it really hard the first time. Like don't go
Right.
to like China or something.
Yeah, go
My
somewhere that's like kind of
yeah,
similar to the country that you're from. So that way,
yeah,
you're kind of you're still within a certain comfort zone, but then you still are kind of out of your comfort zone because again, now you're
yeah.
kind of in a place where you have to kind of interact with the world around you even more than you normally would if
Hmm.
you were instead of like a group of people, and stuff like that,
Exactly.
getting shuttled around everywhere. Like even when I'm in Ubers and taxis in other countries and stuff like that. Oh my gosh, I always end up talking to my Uber drivers and taxi drivers.
Love
Always,
that.
always, always.
Love that.
And it's
Love
a lot
it.
of fun. They give so much insight. So
Mhm.
I'm not chit-chatting, with my friend. I'm talking to other people and it's always a
That's
good
awesome.
thing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to record this today. Really, on Thanksgiving, amazing. I heard you mention consulting, and is there any consulting like work that you want to share with other therapists that you do, or is it like consulting in other ways? Because I don't know if you want to share that or let people know about that or not. It's totally up
There
to you.
there are opportunities out there. The consulting company, I'm not supposed to say their name because
Oh, okay.
they got a contract with Walmart to supply
Oh,
counselors for grief and crisis.
oh, I see.
I'm going to be starting my CEU program this next year.
Oh, nice.
And
Tell us about that.
yeah, so like it's really cool because of the fact that I did jump into the deep end and start like working with interns and
Mhm.
residents. I have found that I really, really, really enjoy like helping counselors when they first enter the field. I feel like I hear similar things that they always feel about,
Mhm.
like, but I just want to make sure I'm helping them. But I don't have all this knowledge. I'm young and I'm working with older clients. What?
That imposter syndrome
Yes,
stuff.
that
Yeah.
imposter syndrome is
Hmm.
so strong.
Yeah.
And like finessing situations again. Like I want to see more counselors in the field working with kids. But
Yeah.
I've seen a shift of us moving away from it a bit because it's so hard sometimes to work with parents. And I am really
Yes.
good with working with parents. I definitely take the time and I do the work to get that alliance on their side,
Amazing.
you
Yeah,
know?
because that was my biggest I love the kids, it was the parents that I
I
was like, "I
I hear it all
just
the time.
can't handle these parents." So that's cool to know there's somebody out there that could actually offer consultation
Oh,
around that stuff because that was my problem. I was like, "These parents are just crazy." Like, I can't even I gotta move them to somebody that's more experienced with this. If somebody's listening, how do they get a hold of you? We'll put it in the show notes too, but just how do people get a hold of you? They wanna talk to you about the consultation or even your travels and how you manage that with your interns and all that stuff. How do they reach you?
feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. I will admit my Instagram page has been neglected. It's one of those plants that only thrives on neglect. Like you cannot water as much. Like that's my Instagram. It's like
Yeah.
that. It's like, mommy, feed me. And I'm like, no.
Yeah,
So
I
reach out to me
can't.
on Instagram because then maybe that'll make me have to do more on
Okay,
Instagram.
all right. Y'all hit her up on Instagram.
And that's emotions are our power. And
Okay.
then, or just look up my name. And then also michellekauble.com is also a good place to find me. And you could also reach out to me anything that's Apple Tree Counseling. Apple Tree Counseling LLC is my group practice. Feel free to reach out to me through there. I definitely am going to have more stuff coming out about my CEU program and my ADHD center next year. So definitely stay tuned with that.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to let you get out of here so you can go to Thanksgiving, and I'm going to get ready for Thanksgiving. But I really appreciate it. And it's nice to
Yeah.
catch up and all that
Yes.
stuff. So, you guys reach out to Michelle if you have questions.